Say, Yusuf is AliExpress John and your wife.
All right, so how are you feeling? That's all.
I feel good.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
I don't even know what's in here.
A rifle.
Looks like it.
So pretend we're having a conversation, even though I'm back here on this side.
Okay.
But
Is there anywhere I should be looking over that side or?
just like we're talking face to face.
Okay.
It feels a little awkward at first, but you and I talk.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Do me a favor, tell me who you are, if you're comfortable, how old you are, and how we got here today.
They don't have enough numbers.
Okay. Say your name, spell it, then sort of how we got here today.
Well, my name is Robert Weidman.
Yeah, but how do
Better-
you want us to?
Okay. Well, my name is Robert Faruq Weidman, and that's Robert. Faruq is what I go by, Faruq. Weidman, Wideman. And my age is, when people ask me that, I say, well, I'll tell you, but you got to tell me first how old I am. If you can tell me how old I am and you're close, then maybe I'll tell you.
65.
That's not close. Actually, you're 10 years off.
Okay. In what direction?
Now you ought to know that.
I do know the answer, but this is your interview.
Oh, okay. Well, I quit playing with it. I'm 75 years old.
Okay.
And it took a while to get here. I don't think I'll be around for another 75. So you never know, though. You never know. I had some very old grandparents, so.
Why don't you tell us how we got to the studio today?
Ooh, how I got here, or how we got here, I'm not sure. I mean, I said I was 75.
Mm-hmm.
That's a long time getting here.
Why don't we start with how you got roped into Norm's nonsense?
How I got to Norm.
How you got roped into his sphere of nonsense?
Well, I was still in prison. I did a lot of years in prison. Actually, 44 years.
Okay.
And Norm came to do an inside out course at Western Penitentiary. I was still there then. And when I came in, and all of us inmates, as we're called in the penitentiary, came in, we told us, Norm was standing there, and we all walked up and told him who we were. And when I said my name, he said, with a surprised look, "Do you got a brother? Is your brother John Edgar Wilder?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, man." And we kind of took off from there. He knew my brother, and he kind of knew some of my story. He knew my story, actually. And so, we hooked up that day, and we've been great friends ever since. Now, I know that's not all you want. And there's plenty more. But that's how it all started. That was that first day, the first moment. And, we went on from there.
So you said that you did 44 years in prison.
Mhm.
I've known you for 10. So that would make you what, 19, 20 when you went to prison?
No, I was actually 25 years old when they caught up with me. The crime had happened when I was 24.
Okay.
And so I called myself going on the run. I wasn't very good at it. I didn't stay out long, but time I got to prison, I was 25.
So what does life, or what does a life sentence mean to someone who's 25? I ask. I'm 32, and I've come a lot closer to my own mortality than I would like, but I can't imagine imagine what it feels like at 25 to be told your life is done. That's it.
That is a difficult question. First of all, it was so long ago. How did I feel? So disappointed, so angry, in some sense, ashamed, in another sense, I felt the world had let me down. You know, I hadn't killed anyone. I understood I was in jail and thought, well, the crime that we did would send someone to jail. But, you know, I didn't kill anyone. So why did they want my life, my whole life? Which was, you know, like you said, at 25, that seemed like a long way away. But there was another part of me that didn't accept it at all. I was either going to get out through the courts or find my own back door to that prison, which I attempted to do for a long time. And I kind of never would give up hope. When I got there, I told myself I'd be out in 3 years. And I was going to work at it. I was going to escape or I was going to get out through the courts. And as time went on, every 3 years, I started anew. And so, you know, I did the best I could with what I had and what I'd learned, because I continued to try to learn to figure out a way out. I just never would accept it. I always had this hope that I was going to find a way.
Was it hope or delusion?
Well,
Maybe a little bit of both?
maybe a little bit of both. And just young enough to not accept that I'd be there forever. Because when I first got to prison, people were still making commutation. So I figured I had commutation, the courts, or I'd make my own back door. And I was determined one of them was going to work because I just was not going to spend the rest of my life in prison. And, you know, I convinced myself of that. I held on to that idea for all those years. It wasn't until the very end, the last time they turned me down on commutation. At that time, I was 68 years old, or somewhere near there, 68, 69, I think 68. And I had hurt my back. I was in bad shape. And they had turned me down. And even my family, they would never say it, but I could see that they didn't believe I was going to make it either. Because for most of them, I kept them believing that I still had a chance. Because I always had this idea, and it's always, well, you know, I found this case in the courts, or I never would tell them about the escapes, but they knew. I mean, I got caught once and a half, we'll call it. The other time, they just thought we did something that I didn't even do, but, you know, but they put me in the hole for it. But after I got sick and got that age, and they turned me down again, and it took 5 more years. You know, back then, if you got turned down for commutation, because you could always file for that, and that means they would commute your sentence from a life sentence to something with numbers, whatever numbers the courts decided, to life, you know, 25 to life or something like that. And, but, you know, I was 68, 69, and when I hurt my back and they operated on it, I couldn't stand up for over a week. And when they took me back, I was pretty beat up. And so even though I had filed another commutation, well, not a commutation, I filed an appeal on the one that they turned down. I was still beginning to give up hope. And like I said, everyone had given up hope. And I figured that everyone that knew me had gave up hope because the evidence said he ain't gonna make it. A lot of people would believe my schemes and scams and ideas. And, you know, there was a few times I talked to some great friends of mine. One that died since, to be outside waiting for me because I swore this is the one, we're going to make it. But none of that ever happened. And, you know, I believe that was, you know, God's grace and mercy because if I'd have got out, either I'd have probably got caught again or something tragic would have probably happened to me. And I'd have never seen a real life.
Yeah, I've heard you described as a career hustler. Is that accurate, would you say?
Yes, I was.
Was or are?
Well, hustle doesn't always have to mean crime. So in that sense, yes, I still am.
Definitely still a hustler.
Yes. So in that sense, yes.
Okay. Tell me about the hospital van.
Well, you're talking about when I was coming home from the hospital with the bad back. Excuse me. Well, they had operated on me, and the operation was horrible. I was in so much pain when I woke up that I didn't know what to do. It took me a long time because I was on heavy medication. This is when they first operated on my back. That I didn't know they had made me stand up and walk up on the bus to take me back to the penitentiary. Because the rules are lifers couldn't stay out at a hospital overnight. And so they were trying to take me back to the hospital and woke me up off of this deep medication. And to me, it's a memory like a fog. But I do remember making a, you know, like hollering and them like pushing me up the steps. And they were breaking all the rules because you're not supposed to wake someone up off of heavy, you know, medication and put them on a bus. But they did that. And I woke up not quite the middle of the night, but late night. It had to be 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, screaming. I tell people I'm not a woman and I don't know what it's like to have a child, but I've seen a lot of women give birth, and I screamed louder than any of them I ever heard or heard of. I was in that kind of pain. I couldn't move. I was just screaming and hollering. And so they were shocked and afraid because they knew they had no business bringing me back there. So they took me back out to the hospital and kept me out there for a few days, like a week. And they tried to help me get up and, get a little better. And I was able to, they had me on a morphine drip or some kind of serious drug dripping in my arm. And that kept the pain down because when I got to the hospital, the doctor was so afraid, he didn't know what to do. He thought he had left some sort of needle or something in my back or in my leg or something. But anyway, I stayed out there for a while and started getting a little better. Started to be able to stand up at least and walk to the restroom. And the doctor had told him twice to not take me back to penitentiary because I wasn't ready to move. So they waited till a Sunday night and sent 2 guards to get me and take me back. And I was still in so much pain, I didn't. I said, I'm not supposed to be, I tried to argue with them. But knowing these 2 guards, I knew it was useless. And they weren't going to call the hospital. They weren't going to call the doctor. The nurses said, well, they couldn't call the doctor. So, again, they put me this time in a car, a wagon, as we call them now, and put me in the back and strapped me in the seat. And, sitting up was way more painful than laying down. And so I'm in this pain. And they're going to take me back. And, one thing, and I hate to bring this up, but one thing that bothered me the most, this was a black guard that I knew really well. He was a dirty, rotten SOB, and we all knew that. But I thought that maybe that connection between us would have him treat me a little more like a human being, because they would not treat me like a human being would treat another one in the kind of pain that I was obviously in. So they put me in that thing and started driving me back. And as they were driving me, and at this point I was in pain. And and not only in pain, just afraid. I hadn't got up and walked. The most I could do was, they had one of those walkers that if somebody helped me, I could get up on it and hold on and go maybe 5 feet to the restroom. But anyway, I was in that kind of pain. But more than that guard, him bothering me, was my fear that, well, this is it. You can't walk. You're going back to prison. This means you go to a prison that we called where they send lifers to die. So I thought it was really over. And so we were driving, and I see a big Mack truck coming towards the car. But he's coming out of an exit onto the highway. But I see him, and he's pushing that thing. He's moving real fast. And, I prayed. I prayed, Lord, please let him hit us. Take me out. Don't make me go back to this prison forever as a cripple. Not just back for the rest of my life, but as a cripple that can't take care of herself, that's going to have to depend on other people to take care of him in a prison. And when you're in that situation, I worked in the prison hospital for years. I know how bad most people treated those guys. Even though, I called myself being a little nicer to them because, I had pity for them. I had sympathy for them. Not pity, but sympathy. And, but I knew there was a lot of guys that treated them like shit. And a lot of the officials the same way. And, I just didn't want to die like that. And so I'm praying, Lord, please let this truck hit us. And then the truck zoomed past us. And, I'm talking to God in my head saying, I did, by then I'd quit trying to escape. I was trying to do it all the right way. I taught school. I helped other people get clean. I went to the recovery unit all the time and talked to the men and tried to talk them into how to try to help them learn to stay clean when they went home. And, I'm asking God, I've done everything. I've done everything you asked me to do. I changed. I'm this different person. And, I'm praying, Lord, please. And, I know people have different ideas about what they believe, and I'm fine with that. people's religious belief is theirs. But I heard him laugh. And I know people say, well, how'd you hear God? I'm just telling you my experience. And he said, I got you. I've always had you. Haven't I always had you? And yes, he had. I've been shot once, stabbed twice, had made it through, at that point, 43 years or so in prison. I'd made it through a lot of things. And when he told me that, I kind of just exhaled. And they took me back, and the very next morning, they call me and say, your counselor wants to see you. And I'm like, tell him to come down here. I can't even walk. What does he want, or she? They said, no, you got to go up to the counselor's office. I said, I ain't going. I fought with him and argued with him, and they told me, well, you got to go. And I said, I can't walk. Well, we get you a wheelchair. So they get me and put me in the wheelchair, and I get up there. A couple of my buddies was there. That kind of lifted my spirits a little bit. They must have knew I was coming. And so I was in the wheelchair, and, good to see them, but still my spirit was tore up, low, sad. So I go in to see the counselor, and the counselor says that I got a call from the governor's office, from the commutation office. And I'm like, I had actually forgot pretty much that I had this appeal in for the commutation, because the lawyer that did it for me has been a great friend of me for years. But I thought he was just doing it to try to lift me up when I got, denied that last time. So I had kind of forgot about it, all this pain and misery that I've been through over the last few weeks, well, months, because my back had been hurting for a while. But when I get in there, the counselor says, well, they want to talk to you. And I can't remember his name, but it's the man that was running the commutation at that time. And she gives me the phone. I say, hello? And he's, oh, Robert, so good to hear from you. I got great news for you. He says, you're going to see the commutation board. And I'm like, all I could hear was haven't I always got you? I got you. I've always had you. And at that moment, my spirit just said, phew. Those blues just kind of flew away. And that hope that I'd always carried with me, that always kept me sane. I've seen a lot of guys die in prison. I've seen guys kill themselves. I twice saw a man jump off the tier. Both times, they almost landed on my head going over. But from that time forward, I started trying to get up. They got me a person to help train me. And before I knew it, I was back out on the track, walking and running backwards and running sideways and getting myself together, because I just knew that I was going home. And I finally went to see the commutation board, and I made commutation. And from there, I got to here. So that's sort of how I got here. And that's the story about the ambulance.
So you said something during that story about how you were hoping this black guard would at least see you as a human, as a person.
Yeah.
Do you feel like of the 40+ years that you spent in prison, that was a common hope that someone would just see you as a person. Maybe even if, I think a lot of us on the outside, we struggle to understand how dehumanizing being incarcerated is. But there's also a part of us that feels like, well, maybe they shouldn't have done what they did to end up there. Maybe they deserve it. But do you feel like it was a pretty consistent struggle, or a pretty consistent theme that people just didn't see you as a person?
Well, a whole lot of the officials and guards didn't. But the vast majority, this one I'm talking about, and maybe over the years, 3 or 4 others. But you got to remember, when I first went to prison, there was maybe 2 or 3 black guards in Western Penitentiary. And so there was such a small amount. Most of them always, not that I mean that they would let us get away with stuff, but they say, hey man, what's up? And you say, hey, how you doing, man? Oh, I'm all right. I mean, some sort of recognition of one another. You know, I find that true now. I mean, it's something about black men. Now, when I was a young man, we used to say, hey, what's up, bro? You know, I came up from a teenager to an adult in the 60s, when we started calling each other brother all the time. We started talking about the struggle. And that's when, you know, America was changing. You know, the history of the 1960s has been told numerous times. And, you know, we started wearing dashikis. We wanted to recognize each other in a new way. When I was a young man, people put each other down about how dark they were or how light they were. And, you know, we were taught racism to where we actually learned it and used it in how we saw each other. Those times in the 60s, we got rid of most of that. And the vast majority of us did. And, you know, I see people my age, I still say, what's up, bro? What's up, sis? And they're old enough to feel it when I say it. And I've always done that all my life. And so, you know, I tried that even with the guards too. Because, you know, I feel, you know, because of what, you know, this life in America that we've had, that we need to say, hey, you remember who we are, right? I'm one of you, you one of me, bro, sis. You know, have that recognition. Not to say that that doesn't go for other people. If I notice people that seem to notice me or recognize me, I speak to anyone. But that, hey, bruh, hey, sis thing was for, you know, people that had the same kind of history that I have as a people, not as an individual. And so those guards, you know, most of them said, hey, man, what's up? Back. But this dude, it's just, you know, I've always thought that they sent him for me. It's more of a smack in the face because he was a real asshole. It's the only word I can think for him right now. And so when he showed up that night, because they waited till late, because they didn't want no doctors or anyone around on a Sunday evening to stop them from doing what they was doing, because they knew they shouldn't have been doing it. And so you know, but I still, somewhere inside of me, thought, you know, that he would at least have some empathy. He didn't act like he was my brother, you know, and I didn't expect that from him. But a little bit of empathy, because, you know, if the positions were changed, I would have. You know, I would have, despite whoever this person was, despite their race or any particular characteristics of theirs. I'd had some empathy. You know, when I seen the person can't even get out the bed, you know, so I don't know that. I haven't thought about him in a long time.
So talk to me about Big Lou and T-Bug.
Big Lou and who?
T-Bug.
T-Bug. T-Boo.
Boog, is it T-Boo?
T-Boo.
Okay.
T-Boo. Ah, T-Boo. You know, you met T-Boo. T-Boo was a different kind of guy. Always was. From the time we were very young, before we went to prison. He was always quiet, one of the quietest people that I've known. And I mean known and had been around in prison for all those years. He was in prison longer than me. He was there when I got there. He actually made it home a few months before me. But he was just a special kind of guy. And when he would talk, you know, I would always listen because he hardly talked. So, you know, but he was a good friend. He was somebody that was loyal. And if you could, and we did, and you remember, get him to tell a few stories, that was real special, to hear him tell his story. Because, you know, he went to prison at 17 years old and did like just about 50 years straight. And I can't imagine what it had been like. I always thought that I had an advantage that I didn't go to jail as a teenager. Because as a teenager, you haven't grown. You know, when I was 17, you know, I acted like I was still 14. You know, I was just as wild and crazy and silly and try anything, do anything. You know, I used to tell people all the time that winners do what they have to do. Losers do what they want to do. And I used to do what I wanted to do. Whatever I wanted to do, that was all right with me. And I would do it. And I couldn't figure out why I kept coming up short and losing. And it took me a lot of years to find that saying. And it's meant a lot to me ever since. You know, I started trying to do what I have to do. And that's when I quit, you know, using any substance, to mind or mood altering substances, whatever. You know, that's when I decided to take college serious, even still in prison. Even when my friends was asking me what was I doing with that big drafting board and laughing at me. But, you know, I began to notice that they was laughing, but I would hear them say, man, you know, Faruq, he's smart. You know, he's starting to teach classes up there, you know, and brag on me to other people. And I knew that they really did appreciate it. But I knew it early on because, you know, I sat there on those same corners when guys would walk past going to school and try to make a joke out of them. And the joke was us sitting there doing what we was doing, which was nothing. And I told someone today, nothing is the hardest thing in the world to do. You know, when we still have life in us, we're supposed to use it to, you know, increase our worth to ourselves and to our loved ones, you know, and to whatever higher power we believe in, or if we don't believe in any, at least we have those folks that love us and that we love, and we want to improve ourselves for them. But you know, so when we made fun of the guys trying to do the right thing, we were making fun of them because we were laughing at ourselves. And so I knew they were laughing at me. And so I just chuckled too and kept on going up to school with my drafting board. And I say because, you know, I did more than drafting. You know, I got a degree. But, you know, I did some drafting. And that's when they would get me. When they saw me with the big old, you know, it was a big drafting board. And I never got good at drafting, but the drafting board used to get a lot of laughs from the guys. They enjoyed that. So,
What about Big Lou?
Big Lou. Big Lou all my life also. He is one of the most loyal friends that I've ever had. Him and a guy named Reggie. But Lou, you know, we'd go to parties as teenagers, and he'd get us chased out of everywhere in town. Because if one of us, if he saw anybody from that neighborhood, and we'd be going to different neighborhoods in the city, and if, you know, he thought they were gonna do something to one of his buddies, and me especially, he'd go punch him in the mouth. We'd have to run out of the hill, run out of Garfield, run out of whatever part of the town we were in. You know, we couldn't go to parties outside our neighborhood or even in our neighborhood. And my other friends would tell me, man, listen, we going over on the hill tonight, man. Don't bring Lou. Tell Lou he can't come. But I'd bring him anyway because I couldn't tell him don't come because he was my, you know, my main man. And, you know, and Lou has his own way of talking. All of us here that know him, he has his own language almost. And he's just a funny, caring kind of guy that helped us do a lot of things with the Inside Out classes here at Duquesne University. Started some organizations that we have that went on for quite some time with the students. You know, everyone that knows him loves Lou. And it's always been that way. But you know, he was just always loyal, would share whatever he had in this world with his friends.
So talk to me about, as Big Lou would put it, ripping and running the streets of Pittsburgh in the 60s.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. That's where he got it from. And because Lou had a family, but he stayed with his, not his family. You know, he had a mother and a father, but he stayed with his grandmother because, you know, the circumstances, the lives of his mother and father, I don't want to discuss them, you know, to any degree, but Lou always felt like an outsider and always wanted to be with the insiders. So in the 60s, when we was calling each other brothers and sisters, he was so attracted to that. And so we were in quite a few little organizations that first started. We helped start one of the first black bookstores in the city. But we were the teenagers. What we did was follow the college guys that were telling us what to do and what books to read. And, you know, I got a brother that wrote, and at this time he was just getting famous. So he only had one book out. But, you know, I was interested in it because, you know, it made me think of him. And, you know, Lou loved it because, you know, these guys that are just coming home from college, they were getting the experience of the early 60s, going to different colleges. they came back with these ideas about changing the community and trying to make it better. And Lou loved that grandmother of his, who told him all kind of stories about how to live and how to treat people. He would relay them to me and our other friends. And so it kept us in what we called back then the struggle. And so we were there for the first Black Arts Festivals in Western Pennsylvania. We did the first one in Homewood. Me and him and our other friends our age, we set up the stages and did everything to get it started. And we had no idea what we were really doing, except we was following these older guys. They were just a few years older, coming home from college. But we were following, you know, the ringing of that bell that rung for us at that period in time. You know, those 1960s that changed this country in ways that, you know, improved our lives. It didn't make everything equal or change everything or change everyone's attitude, but it changed a lot of our attitudes, how we saw each other, how we saw ourselves. We quit that fighting that we were doing. You know, we could go to the other neighborhoods and say, hey, what's up, bro? I started going to some other neighborhoods on weekends and hang out with a guy that lived over there, that we learned to know each other through these art festivals and stuff. And we start, you know, knowing that we were all the same. And even not just black folks, people, period, in America were changing and seeing each other differently. And so it was a, you know, it was a special time in my life. And, you know, now when I look back and I read history, I know it was a special time in the life of this United States. So Lou had a lot to do with us doing that stuff.
So, I think you might have already answered this a little bit, but do you think that that search for brotherhood, sisterhood, community led to a lot of that aggression, that anger, maybe it was hurt coming out as anger? Do you think that contributed, or maybe it was something else?
Well, anger in me,
You, Lou?
I don't know. I had another friend. When I say those other guys, his name was Ricky Brock. He's also dead. Most of these guys I'll talk about are gone. But his dad used to tell us that there was going to be a war in the streets. And so those things kind of build up my anger. But I don't know. Everyone that hears, that's listening to this, the people that know me, I've never really been an angry person. You know, because the truth of the matter is, I was given a lot of love. More than so, as I got older and realized, more than most people I know. And that has nothing to do with skin color or any other differences we see about each other. You know, I was just blessed like that. You know, I was the youngest of 5 children. You know, I can still hear my brothers and sisters saying, when it was time to do the little work that Mom asked us to do, well, why Robbie only has to do that? And, well, you treat Robbie better than everybody. And but that wasn't true, because she loved us all the same and treated us, gave us all that kind of love. And I had aunts and uncles and, you know, a sister that treated me, you know, like like my older brothers did. You know, nobody in the world was allowed to mess with me. And so given that kind of love, you know, that's what I knew. And that's what I've always known. And so I've always been an easy to get along with kind of person. I think Now, not always. You know, as a young kid, I fought too much. But that was because my brother, the one right next to me, that was 18 months apart, Dave, I'd better fight somebody that looked at me wrong, or I had to fight him. And we used to call him Hercules Unchained, and I never wanted to fight him. He was built like he lifted weights when he was a little boy, and just grew up looked like a weightlifter all his life. And so, he said fight, I fought. And, you fight and you learn to like it. Especially when everyone pats you on the back for it. So even that anger, even that kind of attitude that I had to the world was something that the folks that loved me gave me and would be proud of me when they saw it. And so, that's also a part of my character. And I didn't even know a lot of that stuff that I'm talking about right now years ago. I just was doing those things. I look back and remember why. But I also was somebody that would put my hand around somebody's shoulder. Just always was, because somebody always had their hand around mine. So I learned that. It wasn't a decision I made. It was, what I learned.
So when I first met you, almost 10 years ago now, and we did that interview for that correctional policy and practice class, one of the things that you said to me, and I'm paraphrasing, it's not an exact quote, but you said that you always felt a little bit some type of way about your brother's success at your expense, specifically around brothers and keepers. Did you, or do you, or have you in the past maybe resented him a little bit, especially because he profited from something that you cannot?
Well, I don't know if when I said whatever I said at that time, I was talking about he had a lot of success in life. I mean, he shared some of the profit that we made from Brothers and Keepers, which was printed 4 times. So, it made some money. And he shared that with me. He never told me just exactly what he made, but I mean, he always gave to me. And so it wasn't that. He was just the person that everybody said as a child, why don't you be like your older brother? That's what I had resentment about, And then people said, why don't you be like your brother Otis when John was gone? And then it was like, why don't you be like your sister? How come you don't act like your brother David? And so I was the youngest one. The teachers told me that, and adults, period, said that to me. And so that kind of, in my opinion, of my remembrance and understanding of myself as a young man, was part of why I was looking for identity. I didn't want to be like them. Don't keep telling me to be like them. I'm me. See me? What are you telling me? They were trying to help me, though, because they were trying to tell me, why don't you quit acting up? But like I said, I always did what I wanted to do. That's another reason I took to that saying, is because it kept getting me in trouble, doing what I wanted to do. But I was doing it to be recognized. And if it was recognized for whatever, I just wanted them to see me and not John. And he was the one that became most famous. So I heard it about him much more often. So that was the thing that I sort of had that kind of attitude about. But for the most part, in retrospect, for me, he did everything he could imagine to try to, change me and make me be more like him. especially in education and trying to make a better life for myself. But I didn't want to hear it. You know, I wanted the streets. You know, I wanted more than anything to be like my uncle, Big Odie, which Otis is his name. You know, and he was a drug addict. And he was one of the hippest, slickest, coolest guys I knew. And I wanted to be like him. I didn't know that it was the drugs that I wanted to be like. Eventually I got there, but you know, and it was just because I wanted to be, you know, on the street, especially as I got older. Not older, I'm talking about as a teenager. Because I got the wrong lessons. You know, I got it wrong. I should have listened to the adults, but I didn't want to, because they wanted to tell me to be like somebody else. And so I probably was referring to that when I said that to you.
So when Norm and Rick and whatever the earliest days of the think tank found you, do you felt like they saw you, or they were just asking you to kind of be a mascot for their ideas?
Well, we came up with those ideas. At least I thought we did. I mean, you know, because we discussed them, and I had as much to say about them as either of them or anybody else, because, you know, I've always been, you know, let me put it like this, quick story. My mother used to always tell me to quit running with this guy or that guy or this guy, because they were going to get me in trouble. But it was always me that those guys was following, and we was getting in trouble because the trouble was always my idea. And so, and all the guys that know me, and even as we all grew older, they always said, oh man, you was always the one coming up with, man, listen, let's do this. The case that we did was some crazy idea of mine. So I've never been much of a follower. And most of the guys, you know, followed me, especially when we were going wrong. So even when, by the time I'd met Norm, though, I had given up a whole lot of those old ways. By then, I was going to school. The people that were in the first Inside Out class were people that were handpicked by the warden of the prison. And he came to me first. And he came to me and a couple others, 2 or 3 others. And then we told him, we think so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so would make good classmates for this idea. So, you know, what I'm saying is, you know, it's hard to keep me shut up. And somebody telling me what to do ain't never been a good idea. And if I don't think it sounds like what we ought to be doing, even as I got out of wanting to do the wrong thing, I still wanted to stress what it is that I was doing. I wanted to have something to say about it. So Norm or Rick or, you know, any of the other folks that came in from outside, my man Stephen and Elaine, and they most of the time wanted to know what we were thinking. And most of the time, if Norm was here to talk with us, he would say, yeah, you know, you couldn't shut Faruq up. So I always had my ideas and opinions. So, which, I don't know, if that's a downfall or whatever it is, I know that's who I am. You don't get to be 75 and don't know who you are.
now that we're 10 years later, do you feel like you wish you would have done the last 10 years differently? Or do you feel like maybe you should have taken on someone else's ideas or let someone else kind of make some of the bigger decisions? I'm thinking of things like the House of Life.
Oh, well, you know, the House of Life was a collective. And, you know, I think we all put, you know, our energies and our ideas in it. But the truth of the matter is we just didn't know how to do what we were trying to do. And once I became the executive director, I didn't know what I was doing. And by then, before I got that job, I took it because the job I was doing was a little too much for me, physically. I was getting older. I was in my early 70s. You know, I was outside all day in the weather, had to carry a table and boxes and stuff all around the city and set them up and take them down and sit up under an umbrella trying to, you know, or keep jumping in the car and trying to get warm, and all my joints were hurting. And so I wanted out of that job. And the guy that was the executive director, House of Life, was leaving, and I saw a chance where I could be inside and do some work. And it seemed like a good idea at the time. But the fact of the matter is I didn't know what I was doing. And the other fact of the matter is the folks that were doing it in front before me didn't know what they were doing. And the whole group of us didn't know what we were doing. All had the best intentions. But you know, sometimes the best intentions, you know, can lead us astray. And so I came to find out that we just didn't know how to make it work like we wanted it to work. And a lot of our ideas, you know, we argued them away, or we all said we would do this or that, and people had jobs and, you know, couldn't really do the things, the dreams that we had. The idea we all had at first, we couldn't make them work because everyone's life led them in different places. Because you got to remember, you know, 99% of the people that were trying to do the job were men fresh out of prison. But everyone got, you know, a job or moved away or, you know, one thing or another. Or the people that had jobs had to, you know, put more investment in their work and not the House of Life. And so, you know, things just didn't work like we dreamed they would. And, you know, so it was a difficult thing to do and make those dreams come true. And sort of what happened is they didn't come true. They didn't work out like we wanted them to. And so, you know, I think we did the best thing, was to sell the building and, you know, let it go. And so, you know, but the job I had before with Allegheny Health Network, it worked out. It was good, but it got to be a little more than a man 73 years old could do. And in those last few years with the House of Life was, you know, my dream, but it was still more than I thought I had to do. And those that were trying to help weren't giving me much help. And so, you know, I still think it was a great idea. And you know, I feel bad that it didn't work out. I love to see it work out. And it wasn't just the people. It was the law, you know, where we could do it, how many people we could have in the place. You know, we had some really great opportunities early on. Uh, Communities didn't want a bunch of, you know, parolees or, you know, returning citizens, as we called ourselves, all living in the house and being the directors of the house. Didn't want us in their neighborhood. And not all of the neighborhoods, but just people, some of them. You know, there was just reasons that the things didn't work out. That if we'd have known even better what we were doing, we couldn't set it up as we wanted to set it up and saw it in the beginning. So it was a good lesson, but you know, it just didn't work out.
So, what is your?
But one more thing I want to say, I don't feel sorry about what I did. You know, I tried as hard as I could, and that was with both jobs. And I would have kept the Allegheny Health Network job if they'd have put my ass inside somewhere. But so there was good reasons for me to move on.
What's your perception, or what's your concept of restorative justice, and do you feel like you've gotten close?
Ooh, well, you know, I know what the books tell us about it. So I understand what it is. But nowhere have I seen it to know that it works. And I understand that it should work. But, you know, the laws and rules of this country and the attitudes of people, restorative justice just doesn't seem like such a good idea to people. The idea of trying to bring together victims and victimizers. A lot of victims don't want to sit down and try to work out a plan that the victimizer, helps them, you know, get their money back, or especially if you've hurt someone, you know, they're not ready to join in that effort with us, with the victim, the victimizer. So, you know, it's a hard concept not to understand, because it makes great sense to me on paper and in the books what we read about it. But in the effort of it, the victims, and this has a lot to do, and I'm trying to get to the fact that the law and order that we have, you know, people think that's the best we could do. But you know, we didn't. We think that restorative justice would be such a better idea, and that the victims would get more out of it. But, you know, a lot of times people ain't willing to do it. And, you know, to try to get the government to get involved with it is asking a whole hell of a lot. Because we're talking about changing the whole structure that has been worked at and worked on as far as society is considered, sees, as far as society sees. And they think that works. And they think, you know, you got to get 90% of the people that do crime off of the streets, instead of trying to connect them with the people that they've done wrong, and then try to find ways for society to give them a place in society. Because most people don't do crime because they're just evil. So, you know, people do crime for money and the lack of it. And so unless we change the society that gives more people a chance to do better, even after they might have done wrong, that's asking a lot of society. And to get them to join into that kind of idea is more difficult than you can imagine. And I don't know if that's more difficult than we can imagine. I just think that people don't want that. And too many times, the person that's been victimized don't want to have nothing to do with the person that victimized them. And, you know, but it's a wonderful idea. But it's very difficult to make work.
Last two questions. Do you feel rehabilitated? And do you feel like that is because of the time you spent in prison? Or do you think it's more the time that you spent in your community?
Well, you know, my community was in prison. You know, I was in prison the vast majority of my life. You know, I'm 75. I went to prison at 24, came home at 69. And so that was my community. And so to say, do I feel rehabilitated? You know, the prisons used to talk about rehabilitating us. Then they gave up on the idea and thought that, you know, we're in prison to be punished. And then they went back to rehabilitation. This is just the amount of time that I was in prison. And then they went back to that we just need punished. So they didn't even know what rehabilitation was. You know, a person changes himself or herself, or they don't. And now, other people, the greater society, if they choose to, when a person is trying to change, they can assist them. But generally they don't, because they don't know how. And, you know, society is a hard thing to change. You know, it's set up, you know, this country that we live in, the society that we've built, it's built for it to be pretty much what it is. You know, some people have more, some people have less. You got to work real hard to get what you got and work real hard to keep it, and all of those kind of selfishness ideas of society. We've never came up with an idea of sharing, truly. And I mean that worldwide. I don't just mean America. We may do it better than most in America, and still we do it half-assed some of the time, and for those that we choose to do it to and with. And so, you know I changed in prison. But as we grow, most of us change. But when you get caught, when you live the young life that I lived, like I said, doing what I wanted to do, you know, and I got the idea of doing what I wanted to do because, you know, I grew up in a neighborhood where people like me lived on one of the two poorest streets in the neighborhood. And I can remember crying because I went to bed hungry. And, you know, I went to a school when I was in my very young years where, you know, there was 2 or 3 little black kids, and we came from them poor streets that I'm talking about. And just a block or 2 away from my house, as a 7, 8-year-old, the police would stop me and my little friends, the 2 or 3 of us that lived down there, and ask us what were we doing down here. So I was taught from a very young age that I didn't belong there. And so, I had resentment about that, because I was just as smart, as big, as tough, as also kind, also just a little kid that wanted to be a little kid and didn't have choices, like who I could be a little kid with. I couldn't go to some of the little, kids that were another race that were my friends in school. We couldn't go home and play together. So see, all those things taught me that I was different and not wanted where I was at. And so that idea of doing what I wanted to do was just me as a little kid saying, kiss my ass like you're telling me to kiss yours. And don't expect me to go by your rules. And I didn't really understand a whole lot more than that because I was just a child. I didn't have a bigger idea. I hadn't read anything about, but I knew I was treated different. And I knew I didn't like it. And so a lot of that stuck with me. Another reason I was attracted to this ideas that we had in the 60s about, well, we're going to at least love each other and hopefully we'll do that and be a family. And then we began to say, well, we're all going to do it, because I saw other people my age were doing it too. And I began to be able to be friends with those people. And, I was accepted in all kind of communities as the 60s grew. And we saw each other different. And people's ideas were different. But, my early years, I felt like I was out of place in the community I lived in. And so that had an effect on me that lasted for a while. But I changed as I saw people change. I changed as I got more knowledge and more understanding. And I had the gift that I always got, and that was from my friends and family that always had their arm around my shoulder and always did everything they could do for me. And I didn't even show appreciation for it as a young person because I didn't understand that either. I did later on, but the effect of it on me was grand. By God's grace and mercy, it was the greatest effect. And in the end, it saved me. And I guess that was their intent. And in the end, it worked. It took a lot of work out of me. There's an old saying that goes, God will move a mountain, but he expects you to bring a shovel. Well, I finally found a shovel. And But I was one of those that was down there in the bottom of the mountain thinking God was Santa Claus, asking for this, that, and this, and give me this, and give me. Not realizing that, it takes effort to make life good for you. So it took me a while to catch on, but hopefully I did for the most part. That doesn't mean I can still do some dumb stuff and make some dumb decisions like every other human I know. But, so rehabilitation is a hard one for me because I don't know what it really means. I know what the definition is, and I've read stuff about it. But, I don't think prison is the place that you can rehabilitate people. Not the kind of prisons I was ever in. you alienate those folks more than change them. You change them for the worse. And so our idea of rehabilitation just, but I did change. And that was those folks that loved me. You know, my brother John, I told you he shared what he had with me and what he could. He sent me boxes of books, you know, and would come back to, you know, back here to Pittsburgh 3-4 times a year. Always come see his younger brother, or his little brother, as he liked to call me. So, you know, that's my greatest gift. You know, him and everyone else, family, you know, folks that loved and cared. You know, that's bound to change you. So, but rehabilitation, I don't know. I think, you know, I went to jail before I did the 44 years. And I came home thinking all kind of clever ways to steal some money. That's what they taught me in prison. Sitting on the bleachers, listening to guys tell stories, probably most of them live with my mouth hanging open. Thinking, ooh, I could do that. So that's what I learned in prison. And I think most people learn that. At least, you know, I saw that in a lot of people. Yep.
So, anything else that I missed that you wanted to get to?
I didn't know I had an opportunity. But not really. You know, you can't tell 75 years in any, you know, it's a long story. And other people that know me might see it otherwise. So that's just a lot of what I see or think or remember. But nothing else I need to say.
Did you have questions?
Yeah, I have a lot of questions too, so you're not off the hook yet. He's dealing with some of those.
Okay, yeah, I wanna get, oh, yeah, that's cool.
Very uncomfortable being photographed.
That's cool. Oh, look how
Well-
handsome you are. Look at that.
I know.
Well, I want all of y'all to know, and Adrian, you didn't bring it up, but I've been calling you what since I met you?
Little sis.
That's my little sister. Been calling her that ever since, for 10 years.
I'll take this chair right here. Because I got some questions as well. So, you know, Norm and myself and a few, good number of other people have been working on this moral career paper. So, I have some questions as well.
Okay.
So we're gonna start talking about your early years as a kid, you know, and Brothers and Keepers. And just now, you talk a lot about how you were the youngest, and you know your siblings felt like they babied you a little bit. So, can you just talk about how even when you were younger, like you maybe broke some of the standards and expectations just within your own family and community, and anything like any mischief you might have gotten up to, just as a younger little kid.
Well, you know, like I didn't respect authority at all. Matter of fact, I disliked authority. And so, like I was just talking about with Adri, I felt rejected at some early years of my life. So, you know, my mom tried to take us to church, mom and dad. You know, dad sang in the choir, mom was an usher in the church, and tried to give us, you know, a concept of religion and God. But there was also this, what I was being taught, some rejection in the community that I lived in the police, in the society, the broader society. And so, they said, do not steal, one of the commandments. And I stole every chance I got and had no guilt about it, none. Because I felt like, all the things I saw and wanted that, as hard as my mom and dad tried, they couldn't get it for us. And I thought that was unfair. And so I didn't have any qualms about stealing. When I was a little kid and we would be in the store and it was time to check out, I'd watch my mom, watch the checkout person, and be putting candy bars in my pocket. And I'm talking about 5, 6 years old. Because, and a couple times my mom caught me and tried to get me to, you shouldn't steal and stealing is wrong, and try to tell me what's right. And I heard her and, told to tell, yeah, Mom, I won't do it again. But the next opportunity I saw, I did it again. And, that became a part of, especially my young years, until I went to prison. I continued to do that because I felt like I had been shortchanged, and I didn't think it was Mom or Dad's fault. I looked at it as the larger society, and and that might have been just my little ego as a young person. I don't know. I know a lot of it was my idea of rejection. But, that could have also been me just doing what I wanted to do and not, just not accepting the rules. Not accepting the rules. Because not accepting the rules seemed to work out better for me. And so I heard what people said and realized that if everybody stole, then we'd have a pretty crazy society. But I didn't understand all of that. And that's why I said it could have been my own ego, because I didn't care to understand all that. I just wanted what I wanted, and I was going to take what I wanted. And we couldn't have a society at all if everyone done that. But I didn't get that idea until later. And so.
So in Brothers and Keepers, we hear about you playing a major role in staging this high school walkout against your principal. Could you talk a little bit about that, about your motivations going into that, and why you felt that was such an important thing for you to do?
Well, that's the 60s. That's what I talked about. I talked about it earlier. The guys that came home from college, my brother went off to college, and there was all these new ideas of us changing our community and making it better. And so there was a class, what we called back then were the scholars in high school. And there was programs for high school kids here in Pittsburgh, and I'm sure other places, that some of the best students, the A students, went to the universities and, took some classes and stuff, and we called them the scholars. They were having a sit-in in the school, and I went to Westinghouse High School, in the school, and I was cutting class that day, and I didn't know that they were doing this. And so they were all in the auditorium, and the principal had gave them permission to do this. Mr. Fisher was his name. I love that old dude. He was a good old dude. But at that time, you know, I played, cut class. You know, I wouldn't do what I was told still at that time in my life. So I was in the hallway and they were having this class, because it was a class. I seen the auditorium was open, and the auditorium doors, unless there was some kind of activity, were usually locked. Because, you know, they just kept those doors shut. But I saw the doors was open, and so I went to look, and I saw all the scholars up on the stage. And, you know, I saw there were some people sitting down front, about maybe 10, 15 people. And they were up on the stage. And they were kind of looked confused on what to do, and they were, you know, talking. You know, one would go up to the podium, and I sat there for a few minutes, and I started asking questions. So what are we doing? And they start answering me, because, you know, even then I was being busy and thinking I knew something. And so I'm questioning them because I've been going, like I said, to the bookstore that we had created and hearing about the changes that were going on in the society. And so I realized that they didn't know what they were talking about, these scholars. And so I said, okay, we're having a sit-in, we're gonna have a sit-in. And if we're gonna have a sit-in, then we need to have the rest of the kids here so that we can have a sit-in. I mean, this isn't a sit-in. There's like maybe 10 scholars and 15 other students sitting down in the first row. So I said, come on. I tell the guys in the first row, come on, we're going to go get all the other kids. And you go to the first, second floor, and you go, you know, and just started telling people what to do. And so we went to all the rooms and told everybody, we're having a sit-in. And everybody ran down to the auditorium, and the teachers are telling us, stop, what are you guys doing? I go to the bathroom where I know the folks are in there smoking and stuff. And so we just went and told all the kids in the school. And we went down there. And then when we get back, because of the conversation that I was having with the scholar class, they wanted me to speak. I had no idea of what to say, except for, you know, I started thinking about what I'd heard from the older kids. Well, you know, they were, to us, grown because they were off in college. The stuff that they were telling us, because we would have meetings at this bookstore that we had helped set up. And I started thinking of the stuff that they had been telling us about community and Black history and, you know. And so I started thinking about that because they had all pulled me to the side. The principal had told me that I was in trouble and I was going to get kicked out of school. So at this point, I'm completely rebellious because I got all the students down in the auditorium, and they told me to speak, and I just went up there and started speaking. And then the other kids started asking me questions, and I don't know, I can remember just some of those questions that back then they were, you know, this is the time when young Black people were changing the way we dressed. We started growing afros, and I had a great big afro because I seen the college kids coming home, and they were doing all this. And so the kids are asking me questions about that. And you know, I always remember the Afro questions. And I remember this is at the end of the school year. The next year, we came back to school, everybody had an Afro. But, so, you know, we're 15, 16, 17 years old. And and then we decided that we were going to make it a citywide walkout. So we asked people to go to other neighborhoods and to other high schools. And so, you know, the next thing we knew, it was on the news. And, you know, most of the schools in the city had walked out. and we had a list of demands that we wanted, and you know, it went on for a while. It went on for like the next week. I mean, but school's almost over. I mean, it's like the end of May or beginning of June, you know, classes are getting ready to be done. And so the Board of Education kind of gave in, because we got all the kids, not all the kids, but the vast majority of the kids then walked out of school. At the end of the school, this is 1968. Yep. And so we had a meeting with the Board of Education, and they promised us everything. Black history courses. I can't even remember all the things we wanted. Something about school breaks and stuff we wanted that most high schoolers want. And so they gave us everything. Yes, 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 yes. And then after the end of that, we went back to the schools and, you know, told the kids we won. And, you know, like a bunch of kids, we were all excited, and we went out and we said we were going to have a big party up at the park, and we went up to the park in Homewood anyway. And kids across the city went to other parks and, you know, brought what we called record players and speakers at that time and plugged in. A lot of people had bands, and we just had a party. And I remember in Homewood, they tried to kick us out because we broke in the building so we could plug in the music and the bands that were playing. And police surrounded the park, but let us alone. And that happened a lot all over the city. But when we came to the saddest part of that, when we came back to school in September, they didn't give us any of the stuff that they told us they were going to give us. They just wanted to stop our crazy idea, that's what they thought it was, having us sit in. And sometime, you know, you can give 16, 17-year-olds a good time. And, you know, half of us didn't have a real clear idea of what we were doing, because we were that age. And so we were just following one another, and we were following these kids that came home from college. And, you know, we weren't really that clear on what we wanted and what we wanted to do. And the people in charge, the adults, just wanted us to calm the hell down and stop doing that. And, you know, when you're that age, you go home summer, you come back, you think you're older and you think you know stuff, and you go about it differently. But it was disappointing. But they did give us Black history courses, and that's when they started having them in Pittsburgh schools for years. I don't know about today, but so they did change some curriculum. We did make some difference, but we didn't get all the other stuff, because the other stuff was stuff kids wanted. You know, we wanted more time between classes and stuff like that. You know, we wanted more time to get to our next class. We wanted 10 minutes or 5, I forget the time. I mean, it was probably some ridiculous stuff that just kids, because we just made it up on the spot, you know. And we had a couple meetings, I think one before we went to see the Board of Education. But it was something, it was a big deal for us. And the fact that we got so many schools to participate, I think it scared the Board of Education and probably all our parents and the police and everybody else. It's like the kids in Pittsburgh done went crazy. And but I loved it. It was a great time. It was a wonderful time. Yeah.
So you talked already with Adri some about the partying that you got into as a teenager, but at some point that in your young life that evolved into using hard drugs, dealing hard drugs, and other criminal behavior. At what point do you think that change happened, and why?
It it started happening right at the end of 12th grade. I mean, it was already, we were doing a little, we were drinking like, teenagers. I had been drinking since I was 13, but not like drinking, like we would get together on holidays or maybe when we knew somebody was having a party and we put our little change together and get some wine or something. But by the end of high school, we had started smoking weed. And so we were doing that stuff. And next thing we knew, we were taking some pills by the time high school ended. And then we started using some drugs because it was that time. All of a sudden, it was available for people our age. And if you read some history about, drug trafficking and drug use among young people, that's how it started at that time. And so we were a part of the times because, like, when my brother, who's 10 years older than me, when he graduated from high school, they couldn't just go down the street and buy some weed. They couldn't buy heroin or, or pills, because at that time, cocaine wasn't very popular in Pittsburgh. It became that in another year or two. But in these first couple of years, it was weed and heroin, and some pills, but even more pills showed up in the next few years, and cocaine. Crack didn't show up until much later, some years later. But, it all kind of showed up. And what I said, that what they show you in the books is when, the Vietnam War had started. And people started bringing home all kind of heroin and stuff and sending it home, finding ways to get it back here. And so it started to become popular. And, as a young kid, the one thing I wanted most of all was to be hip, slick, and cool. That was my dream. And so, we started finding out who had weed. And by 12th grade, I started selling some weed in school. And this is like the end of the year. And it was a guy that was just a couple years older. But when you're 15 and they're 18, they're like the old guys. You know what I mean? So it was that kind of thing. And I was probably 17, and the guy that had me and my friend, he told us, I can give you some weed, because he was the guy we bought it off, and I'll give you guys a few bags, and you make a couple of dollars here. And, before we knew it, we were selling it in school, because who else was we going to sell it to? So that just kind of progressed. And then, we used that heroin, and it was downhill from there. I mean, at first, we thought we were having fun. The fun changed into, finding ways and means to get more. And, that's when the drugs came in. And, we didn't, start using it every day right away. It just slowly eased in. On the weekend, we would do the stuff. And then we were out of school. We had more time, 12th grade. I kept telling Mom I was going to go to this kind of class and, some kind of vocation to get a job. But that was just appease her. I'm still living at the house. And before you knew it, I was caught up. And, you know, crime came into play. And, you know, before we knew it, we were all caught up. And this was happening, and we didn't know it then, but this was happening. These patterns was going on all over the country because all these drugs. Actually, there's stories about the government bringing carload. Well, we know this now, and they showed it in movies and it's in books. They were bringing airplanes out of Vietnam, Cambodia, all that, landing them in Detroit and New York, you know, with drugs. You know, huge airplanes full of drugs. And so this was happening all over the country, California to Maine. And we had no clue of that because we were young and dumb and just thought we were having fun. And before we knew it, that stuff had a hold of everybody. And so it's one of the downfalls. What I kept saying was the struggle and changing the community. That turned into hustling drugs. The opportunity was there to make a lot of money. And you know, us that were still in it were trying to do that and have fun using it at the same time. But those that started using it, that took over. And the making any money became just to buy more. And, you know, that sent a lot of us to prison in the end. So, and it changed the community. And then crack came along and just burnt the damn community down, at least my community, at least Homewood and the Hill District and parts of the north side and the south side and, you know, parts of the city just got tore up.
So we talked a little bit about your Uncle Odie, the Big O, and you said you wanted to be a lot like him. Could you talk about who he was and why you wanted to emulate him as a young person?
Well, because he was my uncle, and it was just the way he talked. You know, he was using heroin, and he talked real clever and knew all the hip sayings and all the words, you know, and he'd come over our house, and always brought me something, and I'm talking about as a little kid. I had no clue that he was using heroin or that he was using anything. I didn't even know what heroin was at the time. But he was into it when we were kids. And I was, you know, just always, you know, he always loved me, put me on his knee. I'm talking about we were little kids. And he'd talk, and it's hard to explain, but there was just something about him. And I seen him come walking down the street. He had a hip walk, and he dressed real hip, and I just thought he was cool. He was the coolest adult I knew. I mean, I saw other ones, but, you know, and I saw him up there on them corners, and I didn't know that they were using drugs up there. I mean, I didn't really know what drugs were. And there wasn't very much drugs when he first started because, you know, he's a whole 2 generations away from me, you know. You know, he was my mother's age. And so, and drugs had been in the neighborhood for a while in Homewood. And, you know, we lived in Homewood and in Shadyside. But even when we were down there in Shadyside, we went to my grandmother's house on weekends. And so, you know, I kind of grew up in both places. And, you know, he was one of the cool guys in Homewood. And dressed the part and talked the part. And, it was some kind of attraction to me because he was an outlaw. He was different. He didn't act like my parents, you know. And little did I know that they were mad at him about that. And then he went away. And he went to prison. And by the time he came back, I was a teenager. And then he came right back and started using again. And so then by then I understood what he was into. But I still, you know, remembered him. He gave me a lot of love, you know. Always looked out for me, always had, you know, a handful of change, or now and then a whole dollar maybe, because money was completely different. It was worth a whole lot more back then than it is now. I mean, a whole lot more. So, you know, he was just that guy. It's hard to explain, but he was just that guy. Yep.
So, moving forward a little bit, immediately after killing, you and a couple of your buddies go out on the run. Can you talk about what that was like? Did you have a long-term plan? Did you plan on staying on the run forever, or was it more just instinctive you just left?
Well, when you read the book, when we found out what happened, that the guy had died, I think I talk about it in the book. You know, at the time he was shot, and what wound up at the time he died, something happened to me. We were downtown Pittsburgh, you know, going out to party. We got a pocket full of money, and I literally had the shivers, and I didn't know it at the time, but all of a sudden I was like this. Ooh. I found out later on that that was about the time that that man died, and something, you know, my whole life had changed, but I had no clue why I was feeling like I was feeling. And you know, it was so weird that all I could say is, come on, man, let's go, let's go, let's go. And I wanted to get out of downtown because I felt like, you know, the cops was coming, that something was wrong. Because we thought we had got away with it. We thought, you know, that he ran away, and we seen him. I saw him run away, the guy that got shot. And so we figured, you know, he ran. So if you run, and we could hear the ambulance and the police cars coming, so we know they must have picked him up. And somebody you see running away, you don't think they're going to die. And, so we didn't have a clue. I didn't know till the next morning. And when the next morning came, and we found out, you know, Mike called me and said, man, we bought one. I never heard that until that night. And when he told me, but right away I knew what he meant. So we packed a couple things up, a couple, you know, bags of clothes and stuff, and took off. Mike had a car, so we took off, the three of us, and we got all the way, you know, out of town. You know, we was up near Cleveland, actually in Cleveland, and them two didn't want to go. Mike's dad was the police, and he thought his dad was going to get him out of this, and I kept saying, man, your dad can't get you out of this. You know, you done shot a man and killed him. We got to go. And I'd been to jail for a couple months and knew a little more about than he did, and knew some people. Matter of fact, a very good friend of mine who went to jail by then about doing a robbery, and a guy got killed. Him, like me, it was the guy that was with him that shot the other person. And I knew he was in jail for life. So I'm telling them, man, it's over. We got to go. We get to Cleveland. I'm telling them, stay off the phone, don't call nobody. And by now, we've been riding around, didn't know where the hell we was going. We wound up in Cleveland. And I'm sitting in the car because we done got something to drink and half drunk and fell asleep. And I wake up and I see them two on the phone in a phone booth. You don't know nothing about phone booths. Mars. Too young to remember phone booths. Man, phone booths been gone forever. But anyway, I see them in the phone booth. I know what they're doing. I told you don't call home, man. I told you don't call nobody. We don't want nobody to know where we're at. We got to run. That's all I could think. So we got to run. And so they had let their parents tuck them into going home. And so I say, man, well, I'm catching the bus and I'm going. Again, I'm going to do what I want to do. Y'all supposed to follow me. And so both of them went home, and I kept on going. I got on the bus and kept going. And the next thing, I go to the bus station anyway. And all of a sudden, Mike comes back. He knows where I'm at. So instead of him going home, Cecil gets a bus ticket and goes home. But Mike goes to get a bus ticket, gets it, and then changes his mind. He hears me saying, we got to run. And I guess his dad had told him, yeah, boy, you better run. So, knowing that they couldn't get him out of it. He was the actual shooter. And so, I'm all the way in Ogden, Utah. And I told him where I was going. And some way or another, he finds me. First he leaves, comes back, and then leaves again. And then the next day, he shows up where I'm at because he called me and I told him where I was going. And he shows up. And so we wind up back together again. But it was just a wild couple days, Mars. Wild couple days. But I wound up all the way out there. And the wild story is, and you read this in the book, it was the old wino who I start talking to on the bus. And now this is, Mike has left. And I meet the old wino on the bus. And, you know, I'm telling him, man, I'm just going, you know, I'm lying to him. I can't remember. I'm just telling him all kind of lies. But I'm going to California, and, you know, I want to find a neighborhood, you know, old man, I forget his name, you know, one of our neighborhoods, and he's telling me, well, I know a place in Ogden, Utah. He said, man, you like it there. And so I follow him there, and he tells me about the place, and the more he tells me, the more I like the way it sounds. I'm like, yeah, I could, you know. So we go there, and he gets off the bus. And as you ride through this little town, it's so small. He's telling me, like, where the neighborhood is. It's right down the street from the bus station. So I go back, get back on the bus, and then get to the next place right on the edge of town and catch a bus back to where he told me the street was. So I come back, and I stay there for a while. Meet some people, meet him. He shows me where all the winos live at. So, you know, it's like a little overnight place you pay for, a little raggedy room. And, you know, I meet some people in this bar that he shows me. And before I know it, I'm hooked up in the town. And I met this one guy, his name was Cisco. And I tell all kind of lies about who I am and where I'm from. And before I know it, I'm in the town. So it was just a wild couple of days. And his friend had just left this apartment. And so the apartment was empty. So we go break in the apartment because it's it's furnished. And I stay in there for a couple of days. So it was just you read the book, it was a wild couple of days. Mm. Yeah.
Were you thinking at that time about the rest of your life, what you were gonna do, the fact that you were on
Had no clue. None. Just make it to the night, fall out, and see what tomorrow brings. I mean, we had ideas of robbing the dope men out there, because we bought some dope, and we're thinking about robbing them and then leaving town. Ooh, because I meet a guy named Johnny. He's the first person from out there I meet, but he ain't really from out there. He's from East St. Louis. He's the guy that winds up telling on us. And yeah, but it was a heck of a story right there.
So, like we talked about already, you wouldn't pull the trigger, but you're involved in this crime that results in the death of a human being. At what point did the gravity of that really hit home for you and you realized the seriousness of what went on?
Oh, immediately. A man was dead, and I understood that and knew that our lives were over. Like I said, I had a friend that had, something exactly like that had happened to him on a robbery. Guy he's with shoots the people, shoots the man, and he did the same thing. He tried to run. He didn't even make it out of town. They caught both of them, him and the guy that did the shooting with him. The guy that did the shooting was another friend of ours, and he escaped from the county jail and never came back. Died, got shot out in the world. Stayed gone for some years. Stayed gone for quite some time. We saw all of us, I'm talking about years. And then we finally heard that he had got killed. But so I knew, and the crime that we were doing wasn't just like we went into a place and robbed it. You read what it was. It was a scheme that a guy had showed me, a guy from New York. And this guy had so many stories he would tell about all the things he did and where he got money. And by now, we're using drugs, and so we're thinking all kind of plans to get money. And so he had told me this scam about how you set the people up by telling them you got something they want to buy. So when he tells me a story about selling the TVs, and how you do it is you talk them into having the money because you tell them that you got some stolen merchandise. And we figured TVs would be the easiest to sell. And so the rest of the scam came to me. Well, we'll rent a truck and then go to the place after we tell them that we have them. And why we decided it would be car dealers, because car dealers are crooked most of the time. So we drive around, look for car dealers that had like some young guys that were working in there. We figured we'd go for it. And I'd go in and tell them, I got some brand new TVs, and give them a hell of a price and see if they'd go for it. And if they went for it, then we'd come back and get them to put the TVs in the truck, or not give them the TVs, but drive up with the truck and tell them to go with us, and we're going to go pick up the TVs. take them back to the neighborhood and tell them, wait right here. We got to go in to make sure everything's safe. But you got to give us the money. TVs are over there. And since they're car dealers, they got trucks and stuff to put them in. So we drive back to the neighborhood, back to Homewood where we knew where we were going, go in the front door, and we hit a new apartment building. We could go in the front door and out the back because there was front door and back door. And we knew an apartment building that you could just run right through. And once we got that money in our hand and they left sitting in their truck waiting for these TVs, we were gone. But that was hard to do, convince them to get the money. So we decided what we'll do is just tell them to have the money and we'll bring the TVs to them. And we'll have guns. And when we see they got the money, then Mike, we all pull the guns and rob them and take the money. And that's where we really went wrong. As long as we didn't have guns and it was just us talking them out of it, knowing that they were criminal thinkers, they wasn't going to go tell somebody that we talked them out of their money. But, if we're robbing them with guns, then they would report that to the police. But we didn't think all that. We didn't think all that out. So we got away with that once. And then the next time we did it, that's when the guy got killed. But as long as we did it a few times before that, just talking them out of the money and then taking them back to the neighborhood and running through that apartment building. And if we'd have stuck with that, but, that wasn't quick enough. We wanted what we could, we wanted what we wanted.
So when you eventually did get caught, did you tell that story and also what that felt like? Was there any sense of relief that you didn't have to run anymore?
No. Because I knew it was over. I knew it was over. I knew once we got caught that it was done. We were done. So, all I felt was, scared, knowing what was getting ready to happen to me. Just, I'm going to prison for life. Because I knew that that's what this crime that we did, that was what it, we got convicted. Like my friend Henry, we were going to get a life sentence. And even though I didn't shoot the guy, because I knew what happened to Henry. And I had been in jail like before for a few months. So, guys told me all those stories. I knew, I'd been in jail and heard it all. And then my buddy, so I knew what happened to him. So when it happened, I can't even think of the right word for how, I just was broke. I knew this is the end of my life. It's who I am and what I thought I was and who, I'd lose it all. And I didn't know what life in prison was. And it wasn't like I was scared of prison. I was just broken and afraid. I'm not going to get out of this. There's no getting out of this. Ain't no few months and go home or none of that. We done committed a homicide and we going to pay. And we did.
What do you remember from the trial?
Very little. The lawyer I had was, nothing. He was terrible. He didn't have no defense. I had no defense. The prosecution presented their case, and his idea of a defense was to have me go stand in front of the jury, and you can't even see it now because of you know, I got a rough face. But I had freckles when I was that age. And not that much. But his defense was for me to go stand in front of the jury so we could try to say that these people had the wrong person and that I didn't look like what they described I looked like because I got freckles. So he took me and stood me in front of the jury to show them that I had freckles, which was the saddest. But I'm young and dumb and don't know what the hell I'm doing. And, you know, this was his only idea. That was the defense, which was awful. But we had no real defense. We had been identified by 3 people. We didn't have no defense, or I wasn't there, or have somebody come and say, well, I was with her all night, or you know, something. We had nothing. We had nothing. And I wouldn't, you know, the other guys in jail told me, don't cop out, you know, don't make a plea, because they're going to give you life sentence. And you're not going to get out from that. And then you won't have nothing in the court to fight with. You know, maybe they'll mess up and do something wrong legally. At least you'll have something that you can fight with. So I went all the way down the line with this dumb lawyer who's telling me all this dumb stuff. When I look back and think about that, now all I feel is dumb as hell. But I didn't know nothing about the law. Nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. This is the first time I went to, you know, the other time I said I went to jail for those few months, I took a plea for that. So I didn't know nothing about being in court and being on trial and, you know, none of that stuff. So I'm listening to this stupid lawyer, and he was pitiful. He just robbed us. Took the money that my mom, I think, you know, my mom came up with the money. No, he was a public defender. That's what he was. And that's how they treated us.
So, you know, you're convicted, you're sent to prison, you're serving this life sentence. Can you talk about what it's like inside the environment and how you're going about approaching social situations when you first started your sentence?
Well, Western Penitentiary is right in Pittsburgh. It's on the north side of Pittsburgh. The building is actually still there. But in those years, when I first went to prison, people stayed in the prison closer to their house, especially if you had a lot of time. You know, there was a prison up right outside of Philadelphia called Graterford. And so most of the guys from Philadelphia were in Graterford. Most of the guys that went to jail from Pittsburgh was right here in Pittsburgh. So it was, by now, I've been in the life a little while, you know, just being 24, but I had started early. I'd been doing this stuff, like I said, since I got out of high school. And so, and you know, I was from there, so I knew all those guys. So when I got to prison, I knew everybody. Not everybody, but I was the homeboy. So, and I was going there with my homies. And so, you know, we were definitely about, when we got to the county jail, this is how bad we were. When we got to the county jail, we went around robbing dudes that had drugs. Because the 3 of us would jump on somebody in a hot minute. And so any guys that looked vulnerable, we'd go try to take this stuff. So, you know, by now, we knew we were just in trouble. But we still wanted to, you know, some drugs, So we were still chasing it like that because we were lost. We're three, and them two, the two with me, I'm 24, they're both 21, 22 and 21. You know, they're real close in age, just a couple months apart. And so we were still looking for something to get high on because we didn't know what to do. We didn't know nothing about the law. We had no clue. We were three dumb young dudes that done something that they didn't have no idea of what they were getting into. And because we had pulled it off those couple times, you know, every time we pulled it off, we had a bunch of money and, you know, we could have all the drugs we wanted, and we thought we had found something that was slick, that we couldn't go to jail for a whole lot of time because we had figured out that we're robbing other criminals. That if they want to buy stolen goods, you know, they want to be in crime. So we're thinking the way we were going to do it, we did it at first, that it seemed like a way we could get money without taking so much risk. And it wound up, when we decided to pick up the guns to make it a little easier, Mike got stupid and shot this guy. He swears to this day that he didn't mean to shoot him, that he fell and the gun went off, because he shot him in the shoulder. And I believed him, and I still believe him, because I just don't think he'd have just straight up shot the guy. Plus, you know, it was a lot, a car lot. And you know how it has the stone, gravel like on the ground? I heard his feet slide. I heard them both sliding. And he hollers my name. I'm mad at him for calling my name because he wasn't supposed to be calling my name because I gave these guys another name. These guys don't know us. But he hollers because he's shot in shock. He's running, Robbie, he's running. And I'm on the other side of the truck, and they're on one side, I'm on the other side. Well, actually, I'm in the back, and they're on the other side, and I can't see him. And the guy runs, I hear the boom! And I hear the gravel again. And so I run around this way, and I see the guy running down the street. So we panic. I'm picking up the money, actually, when he hollers. I pick up the money because they threw the money on the ground. And he hollers, and then I hear what sounds like a shooting. And I run around the other side of the truck, and I see the guy running. And so I think he's all right. We had no reason to believe he was dead, but the whole story was just, we should have never done it. We should have left the guns idea alone. It was a bad idea. And, you know, I always felt real guilty about that. Because not only did this man die, and the deal was between the three of us that we was not going to use the guns. The guns were just props to scare the guys to give us the money. And this guy winds up trying to grab the guy, falling, gun goes off, shoots him in the shoulder. And you read the book, you know that he wasn't supposed to die. And that was one of the things we thought we could get out of jail on, legally. Because the ambulance and the doctors at the hospital, they took him to one hospital. He was still alive, talking to the ambulance drivers and everything. They take him to one hospital and they say, well, he needs to go to another hospital so that the doctors can bandage him up. And we had Sarah Wick, who was the Oh shoot, what do you call it? I'm lost for words. I'm getting tired over here. But came to court, the doctor, and said they should have never done nothing. There was a way you could have bandaged his shoulder. What he did, he bled internally because they messed him up, and his family got a whole lot of money for it because he should have never died. He was shot in his shoulder, and they bandaged him up wrong. Put all these bandages on the man. He bleeds to death while they take him to another hospital, and all they had to do, if they'd have patched him up right, he would have never died. And so, there was just something against us. And we took him to court on that. And that's when I got the new trial. I tell the story in the book about how I got the new trial. But they take it back and, said that, we shot him, so we have to deal with the outcomes of it. But the family, I forget, it might not seem like a whole bunch now, but the family got $10,000. And at that time, which was like 74, 73 actually, that was a bunch of money for the doctors to pay. And the hospital paid it to them because they were wrong. They should have patched that man up. They should have took him to the closest hospital. And the way to patch him up was something that they learned in World War II from people to get shot. All he needed was to be bandaged right and then taken to the other hospital if they wanted to. But, I went to and fought that thing for years. Finally got the new trial and everything. And then they took it back.
So, in a think tank meeting a few weeks ago, you talked about how, a little later down the line, the man who killed your son was kept in the same prison as you were. Can you talk about how that felt?
Well, remember, he was in the same prison. What happened was, like I said, I knew all the guys in the prison by then. And this guy killed my son. And they brought him there. There was 3 of them too. But the one they brought to the Western Penitentiary. But they didn't let him out. They had him in the hole. And I knew he was there because people told me. And because he was a guy from Hazelwood, and all the guys from Hazelwood knew him, knew his family. His family was like the big dope dealers out there. And at that time, there was a lot of drugs in Hazelwood, a lot of dope in Hazelwood. And so this guy was part of that family that had it, and they had a lot of it. And, that's why, what happened to my son was he had a gang, and he had his boys with him, and they went and broke in my son's girlfriend's house, and, he came running down the steps. They shot him, and then they ran. And what was the question again?
Just how it felt, being in
Oh.
the same place as him like that, and the moral struggle that comes with it.
Okay, well, guys, all the guys from Hazelwood knew me. So they all came to me. And one of them was a guy that was one of my guys I worked out with every day. Real good friend of mine. He's still in there. He's doing a life sentence. He got 50 years in at this point, or close to it, around 48, 9 years in. But anyway, so they came and asked me. He came and asked me to let him get out of the hole and being in prison, because he was a friend of his. And he was a friend of the family that had all the drugs. And they had a lot of money, and they, was the gangsters of the town. And I hope some other people would ask me, man, let him come out, he's a good dude, and this, that, and other. And so I thought about it. you know. And one of the things I learned is about when you forgive somebody for doing something to it, it ain't about you forgiving them. You know, hatred and anger is hell of a thing to carry. And, you know, because of what I was involved in, you know, guys was trying to tell me that I needed to be more understanding. And part of me wanted to do it because they all told me how this dude was a good dude and, you know, wasn't going to be no trouble with me and him if they let him out. And, you know, he wanted to know because he wanted to stay down here in Pittsburgh where he could get family visits. And dudes is telling me, man, you know he got a lot of money. You let him out, you know, he'll probably give you something. I'm thinking about this. And so they're supposed to let him out the next, you know, they're supposed to keep him in the hole. So I go in that night, and we all find out about this in the evening, right before, you know, night lockup. And so I tell him, man, I'll let you know tomorrow. I don't make no commitment, one way or the other. But I go in there that night, I think a lot about it, a whole lot about it. But the next day, when I first wake up, find out that they knew that this was the guy that killed my son, and they shipped him out. Before, you know, before breakfast, he was gone. So I didn't have to face that. But I really didn't know what to do. But my problem was that even if I did it, you know, one day I might be feeling terrible about being in this damn prison, you know, because some days was worse than others. And I don't know what I might have did. You know, I might have went and got something and snuck up on this guy and busted his head open. Because, you know, I was hurting about my son.
I was gonna ask if the thought of letting him out so that you could hurt him had crossed your mind.
Yeah, that night, all that crossed my mind. All that crossed my mind. But you know, at that time, I thought I was getting close to getting out. This is before I got that new trial that I had and everything, and I'm like thinking, you know, I'm gonna just tell the guys that I'm gonna let, you know, the warden or the captain at the jail know, hey man, that's the guy that kills my son. Don't let him out in here, because I don't know if I'm gonna be able to stop myself from hurting this guy. And that's how I truly felt. But at the same point, I didn't, you know, this guy was somebody all the dudes knew, because his family is known, you know, real noted family in the little gangster world out there. And so I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And, you know, God was looking out for me again. You know, like I said, he always had me. Well, like he told me. And he had me that day, because the next day, wake up and that guy was gone, which was another blessing, because I just don't know. I mean, I wanted to tell myself I wouldn't, but on the other hand, I just don't know. And to this day, I really don't know. You know, I like to believe I wouldn't, but just don't know. I mean, because, you know, somebody kill your son, that's a lot to take. You know. But I'm thinking maybe I'm going home soon. I'm close. And I don't want to let everybody down. You know, so it wasn't just about me and my anger and all of that. You know, I didn't want to let mom down again, you know, my brothers and sisters, you know. And so, still till this day, I just don't know. When people ask me, what would you have done? I don't know. And I could have let him out probably and not done nothing, at least right away. But that day might have came, you know, I might have found out, you know, what I found out, that I got the new trial and then they took it back, and there went my chance to go home. So, you know, what would I have done? When I came back that night and I see this dude walking around that killed my son. And I could have never liked him. And he knew a lot of people I knew and was friends with. So it was a whole lot of confusion in my head. I was so glad the next day when they said he was gone. So glad, you know. And I felt like God said, okay, I'll take you this one, you know. So, that,
At some point, when you were on the inside, you started changing. You dedicated yourself to education of not only yourself, but education of other people, you know. When did that change from this guy, when you first got in there, who was robbing people, beating people up, to this, you know, pillar of reformation? When did that change happen? And why?
well, it had a lot to do with my son getting killed. Because soon after that, well, you're too young to remember, when the Crips and the Bloods were running Pittsburgh, you know, red and blue, you couldn't go on one side of the town. If you was, you know, the Bloods had the red and, you know, and there was the blue and the red, and all of that madness was going on. And it started down the prison. All these guys started coming in there. All these young guys started coming in there. And not too long after that, my son gets, or right around that time is when my son got killed. And I didn't want to see this madness keep going on. And so me and some other guys that now were sort of like the old heads. And we're watching all these young dudes coming to jail. They first came in and started telling us that we couldn't have red or blue handkerchiefs. And I mean, that was just stuff that we had. You know, we didn't have much of nothing. And, you know, they would jump on each other. And so we called a meeting with a bunch of the ones that were running it, and took them up to school, because by now I'm teaching up to school. And, you know, we just was letting them know that, listen, you can't come down here and run these prisons. And, you know, so we talked to them, and, you know, some of the old heads knew all these guys. You know, they were their nephews and girlfriends' sons, and, you know, these were guys from our communities. And so we got them all together, talked to them, and then got them with each other and had another meeting. Not all of them, but the ones that were like, you know, the OGs, the bosses of the gangs. And we all sat down, and because there had been some really big fights, and it was going on regularly. And, you know, they had to have them all. It was like some was living in this block, some was living in that block, and this block was becoming the Bloods, and these becoming, you know, the Crips. And so we finally just got them to calm down and straighten out. And they seen what was happening. You know, guys was getting knocked in the head, getting shipped out. It was madness. It was real bad for a couple of months, until we kind of got together, took them up to school, got a classroom, a lady named Miss Red, African lady. And she was a teacher up to school. And so she had switched her classes to night whenever she wanted to, and she'd let us use the classroom so we could talk to these guys. And we did that for a while. And we got it to calm down. And a lot of them guys wound up going to school, taking some of the classes I was doing, the algebra classes then. And, we just talked to them and talked them down from the madness. Plus, they were living now on top of each other. It wasn't like when all of them lived in this part of Homewood and the others lived all up in Wilkinsburg, where they didn't have to see each other every time they went to eat. I mean, now it was like they were living on top of each other in this little small prison. And, so we had to convince them, listen, y'all got to leave that Crips and Blood war out there, or none of y'all gonna make it out of here. And so they heard us and calmed it down. But man, I kind of forgot about that till you brought it up. That's in the book too, isn't it? Yeah.
I was wrong with that. So you talked with Adri some about, how the prison system and being in there, especially for so long, makes you feel less than human. Can you talk about the spaces that you either stepped into or created, like the think tank, that did make you feel like a person?
Well, a guy told me a story, I think you might have heard this before, about changing, about knowing when to change. And that's when I really started trying to figure out ways to do more than nothing, because, for the first couple of years down there, I did nothing. Work out, go to the gym, play basketball, go in 3 times a day for count, go eat, go work out, go sit on the bench, smoke a little weed, tell lies to each other, go in, eat, the same thing over and over and over again. And, after a while, it begins to almost smother you. And like I said, I seen it just drive guys insane, especially guys with all that kind of time, like I was sitting on. And so, I knew it was time to change. And this guy named Shoes told me, you got to know when it's time to change. So I knew it was time to change. And my mother kept trying to talk me into going to school. And so I did. And that's when I began to change, because I had something else to do. I would go in and, do algebra, and that keeps your mind, you're in classes now. You know how half of the stuff that you got to do is on your mind all the time. And so I was doing that. And then they asked me to start going to the recovery unit, because I'd start going to NA meetings, and I was talking about recovery, and so then I started going over there, and I found out about trying to help people help me, maybe more than it helped them. I used to tell the guys at the recovery meetings that I would go over and talk to, I'd tell them that if none of y'all got anything out of what I had to say, I did. So I'm going to leave here feeling better. If what I told y'all don't make no sense and you could have done without it, that's okay. But I came to try to do what I could for you, and I'm going to feel better when I leave. And that's the truth. It was the truth. And so, I started feeling better from dealing with them. And so that's when I started to change. And that was about 10 years in. Yeah. It took that long. But remember, I was telling Adri about how I always had these 3-year plans. So, there was other things I did. I was going to the law library, trying to figure out ways to get out of there. then I started going to school for a little while. And, just one thing led to another. The more positive stuff I did, the more it changed me. The more it changed my outlook. The more it changed what I thought I would do or not do. The more it made me realize that, I had to keep learning and doing new things to keep my own mind, to keep myself safe from just the boredom of, Groundhog Day, of that same thing. It didn't matter if it was Tuesday or Friday or, nothing had any meaning anymore. And, that was hard to deal with. So, I made my own world. And that was school, recovery, trying to help others. And, that made a change. That made a big change for me.
So, when you did get commutation for your sentence, combined, with your brother's book about you and him and your life being out, there was obviously a lot of media attention from 60 Minutes. It was on national news. What were the positives and the negatives of getting that much attention on your case for you?
Well, it changed how everybody saw me. I mean, the next morning, after 60 Minutes was there, after the show came on, that I was on, the sergeant, who was the same sergeant that used to chase us out of from under the little tunnel in front of the auditorium, he was the dirtiest, rotten guy there was. He would just do rotten stuff to people because that's how he was such an asshole. And, he had a little man's complex and everything. But anyway, he comes to my cell the next morning with the captain talking about my man opening my door, wanting to talk to me like we old buddies. Everybody in the jail knew my name all of a sudden. Everything changed. 60 Minutes is 60 Minutes. And, they came and had all kind of big Cadillacs outside. And the other craziest thing was I got mail like crazy. Thousands and thousands of letters. It went on for months and months. Whole school classes. The teacher had seen the show and she'd had a whole class write me a letter. That happened a number of times. And people just kept writing. The guard would come at mail time because they hand out the mail when we were locked in. And he'd come and have a whole bag full of letters from me. So it was amazing. And seeing, and so many of these people wanted to know how they could help me and telling me, just congratulating me on the things that I was doing and sending me all kind of religious texts and and from all over the world. At least North and South America. I can't remember if I got anything else that I can remember. But this went on for months and months. And it slowly slowed down. But, when I got these these letters from the classes, I'd write them all back for years. I wrote, these students, college, high school. So it was mind-blowing. And it was amazing that these many people to me seen that show and wrote me. So 60 Minutes is big. Still are, And so it was amazing that all these folks wrote me. At first it was mind-blowing. the first couple weeks, literally, they would come with they'd have the bag that they carried everybody else's mail in a bag like this to give me, you know? And the guard would stand at the door and hand them all through the bars. He'd have to keep getting a handful. I said, man, the more than they, man, look at all this stuff you got, man. Look at all this. So that was one of the most amazing things. That was the amazing thing. And then all the guys in the prison that I hardly even knew who they were, all of a sudden was my best buddies. Talking about, hey man, what's up? What are you doing? You going out, you working out? Come on, you heading to the chow hall, let's go eat. You know, everybody was all of a sudden my best friend. I'm like, really? Everybody knew my name, all the guards knew my name, all of a sudden, you know, it was just, the whole jail saw me in a different light. And it was amazing. It was just amazing how that changed people's outlook of who I was. Of whatever outlook they had, all of a sudden they knew me. And so I guess they probably told their people, yeah, did you see the guy that was on 60 Minutes Sunday? That's my man. So that was an amazing time. Yeah. And I stayed in touch with them for the longest time. They tried to help me get out. Yeah, they wrote letters to the commutation board for me several times.
Was it upsetting to you at all that it took this, TV show for people to treat you well and be nice to you?
No, it was just it was funny for me. It was just funny how people could change like that. Because they saw me on TV, all of a sudden they seen me in some different way. I guess they wanted to know me because they saw me on TV. And, nobody said they didn't like the show. Everybody was amazed at how it went. So it was just amazing. I still remember the guards standing there handing all them letters through the door. It would take me the rest of the evening to read them sometimes, especially early on. But I read every one of them. I didn't write them all back, but I wrote a lot of them, especially the ones that asked me to write them and stuff. Yep. In the classes, the ones that the whole class would write, I'd write the teacher and ask him, should I write the class? And if they said yeah, I'd send like a letter to the class mentioning, the ones that wrote and what they said and stuff. So it kept me busy and entertained for a while. Yeah, it was kind of like fun for a while. Yep. And some people that came to visit me and all of that. Yeah, I got some visits and all of that. Yep.
So just sort of conclude, after over 40 years in prison, you finally get to go home. But like you talked about throughout, the world is completely different. So can you talk a little bit about adjusting to that and how difficult that was for you?
Well, at first I was still in the halfway house. And I would have to go downtown to get anywhere. Well, the halfway house is downtown. So I'd walk down to town and, I'd be walking down the street and somebody'd run up behind me and grab me, Faruq, and pick me. It'd be somebody that was in one of my algebra classes or trig classes. Man, I'm so glad you're home. And again, a whole lot of these guys, I didn't know who they were. They faces was familiar, but it was like, they were just like the guys in prison. All of a sudden, I was all on TV when I came home, and so everybody knew me again. So that was kind of reminiscent of the 60 Minutes thing. because all of a sudden everybody knew me. And so, you know, I had a great welcome coming home. It was real special. But, you know, that kind of died down after a while. But the truth of the matter is still people run up to me to this day after, it'll be 7 years come the 5th that I've been home. And so I still see people that I haven't seen. But most of them are people that I did know, but I still don't remember their names. I remember their faces. That happened just last week, somebody. So anytime I seem to go to a big affair where there's a lot of people, I run into somebody that I knew back then. And, you know, I get a lot of love. Like I was saying earlier, it's still there. So it's kind of amazing. It really is. It really is. It's been even in what we're doing today, this is all a direct result of that. Of, you know, me changing in there and helping stop the gang stuff, helping people get clean. I meet some guys that did go home and go to NA, and I meet some that come home. Matter of fact, a guy that just came home, it's been home a couple months. He comes to NA meetings. I still go to NA meetings. So a whole lot, you know, a lot of stuff changed. You know, my life changed quite a bit. And like you said, all of this, like Adrian is, how did I get here? A lot of what I talked about here today. And so, you know, I wonder what my life would have been without all of that. Without the 60 minutes, without the, you know, all the attention, without my brother being there to help, without that lawyer that wrote that last appeal on the commutation. Me and him have been real close. Just so many things that go back to all of that. And, you know, I've done a lot of speaking to a lot of organizations and classes and just different organizations all around the city. Did that for a long time. Not as much now, but did a lot of it over these 7 years. And a lot of it goes back to that. And when I try to talk about those young years, it's almost hard to believe how young and dumb I was about the crimes we were doing. Because, you know, then I know what it was. It was the drugs. And I really was out of control. And I wasn't really considering the danger because it was almost, you know, I was using drugs and you did what you had to do. And then how I changed and let that go and, you know, started going to school and trying to help people and it changed it all. And then 60 Minutes and other people came into my life attracted to what they saw. So, appreciate you, Morris.
I appreciate you as always for.
All right.
That's what I have. Do you have anything to add? Feel free, or
I think that's it.
that sounded like a pretty great
Yep.
final note to me. So, I think we're about
I think here he comes.
on that fire. I'm just outside for like a half hour just watching.
Is he still there?
Oh, maybe not.